The other thing, which is also, a matter of a dispute, which in my mind is ultimately kind of sterile, is that when they're talking about is the apparent meaning of the word intended or not. So for something like وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ وَالْمَلَكُ, you're talking about the Day of Judgment and your Lord will come. So the dominant meaning that comes to mind when you hear the word come, ja, is to transfer from one place to another. So if that's what you understand from ja, then that can't be the meaning with regard to this verse, because Allah transcends space and time. Space is something He created, and He cannot be encompassed by His creation. So if you then understand ja to mean something else with regard to Allah, and laysa kamithlihi shay, then we're sort of chasing our tails here when we dispute about it. And Allah is best. Anyway, what I wanted to focus on in this lecture is the actual cases of what the majority of scholars call majaz, its occurrence in the Qur'an, and the different categories like that. Before we get to that, though, one last point, which is the objections of the Zahiris and some scholars who had somewhat Zahiri tendencies among the scholars of the Madahib, such as Ibn Khuwaizmindad, who was a Maliki scholar. They said if you accept that there is majaz in the Quran and the Sunnah, then a denial of the literal meaning, to say that the literal meaning is not intended, it implies that there's falsehood in the Book of Allah. And the response to that is, no, one must simply understand the address in terms of the way the Arabs use their language. And As-Suyuti, in responding to that, he said I'm just more or less summarizing what he said, that denying majaz leads to gutting our appreciation of many aspects of the Quran's deft use of language. So now we get to the major classifications of majaz, and the one that's simpler and less branching into many, many subcategories is what's called majaz aqlee, rational metonymy. And this is also known as majaz al-isnad, because isnad in grammatical terms means relating an action to its doer. And so that's what's intended here, that majaz aqlee means to relate an action to other than its actual actor. Now, examples of that in Surah Al-Anfal, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, وَإِذَا تُلِيَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُهُ زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا. And when His revelations are recited to them, they increase their faith. Now, the majazi aspect of that isn't as clear in the English translation because of all of the pronouns. But it's quite clear in the Arabic that the actor which is increasing the faith of those believers is the verses themselves. That the ayat are increasing their faith, whereas in reality it is Allah who increases their faith as a reward or a treatment for the way that they respond to the verses. And so, it's a kind. This is all kind of a very nitpicky sort of rational exercise when we're talking about majaz aqlee, because it's pretty obvious. I mean, it's that jump that the mind takes in these kind of situations is such a natural mental exercise that to point out that the actual actor is someone else it's almost like, so what? But other examples, talking about Fir'aun, إن فرعون علا في الأرض وجعل أهلها شيعا يستضعف طائفة منهم يذبح أبناءهم ويستحيي نساءهم. Indeed, Pharaoh exalted himself in the earth and made its people castes. A tribe among them, or a group among them, he oppressed, killing their sons and sparing their women. So that's Surah Al-Qasas, verse 4. Actually, Fir'aun, he gave the order for the males to be killed, and therefore the killing is attributed directly to him, although he didn't actually kill them with his own hands. But because he gave the order, it was on his orders that the killing was done, that the killing was attributed to him. A similar situation again with Fir'aun, but this time وقال فرعون يا هامان ابن لي صرحا لعلي أبلغ الأسباب. In Surah Al-Ghafir, verse 36, Fir'aun tells Haman, O Haman, build for me a tower, that perhaps I may reach the roads, that is, the paths of the heavens. So he didn't expect Haman to actually get out there with bricks and mortar. He expected him to give orders to workers to build the tower. And another example in Surah Muzammil, يَوْمًا يَجْعَلُ الْوِلْدَانَ شِيبًا, verse 17, the day which will turn children gray. So it's not the time itself that's doing it, but the events of the day. And then this majaz aqlee, they divide it into 4 subdivisions. First, where both elements of it are haqiqi, they're actual. An example of that, وَأَخْرَجَتِ الْأَرْضُ أَثْقَالَهَا. In Surah Zilzal, verse 2, and the earth yields up her burdens. So, the earth is real, and the burdens are real, and the yielding up is real in the sense that akhrajat, yani these skeletons, the bones of the dead, the earth is splitting and the bones are being expelled, and then those people are coming to life. But it's not actually the earth that's doing expelling. And then there's a type of majaz aqlee where both elements are metaphorical. أولئك الذين اشتروا الضلالة بالهدى فما ربحت تجارتهم. So they purchased error for guidance. They spent guidance to purchase error. So that and their business, their trade did not profit. So this is not an actual business, and it's not actual buying and selling. They purchased error at the price of guidance. Okay, and then there's a third category, which is where the first element is haqiqi and the second is majazi, and then the fourth would be the flip side of that. So examples of that: كلا إنها لظى نزاعة للشوى تدعو من أدبر وتولى. Now this example is quite disputable. I would consider it to be not a very good example. From Surah Al-Ma'arij, verses 15 to 17, No, never, for indeed it is the fire of hell, eager to roast. It calls him who turned and fled. The fire when in Surah Qaf, when Allah said, هل امتلأت فتقول هل من مزيد, Allah will ask the fire of hell, are you full? And it will say, is there more? So the fire, according to that, will speak. And so if it can speak, then it can also call. So anyway, but that's something that was proposed as an example of that. Another example that may be more on target, حتى تضع الحرب أوزارها. The war is real. It's laying down its burdens. It's majazi. And then an example of the other type, the ummuhu hawiyah, the fourth type, in Surah Al-Qari'ah, verse 9. So hawiyah is a name for pit of hell. It's called a mother here in the sense that a mother embraces its child, cares for it, and then the child always comes back to it. So in that sense, the fire will encompass the disbeliever, and it will focus its attention upon punishing the disbeliever. And every time the disbeliever tries to escape, he or she will be brought back to this pit of hell. So that's a kind of tashbih and majaz. Now, a much larger category is majaz lughawee, linguistic metonymy, which is the use of a word or more than one word to mean other than its primary linguistic meaning. And there's just tons of examples of different types of that, referring to a whole by one of its parts. Now, the example given here is, we have to make all kinds of caveats here because the law is not composed of parts, but when we think of these terms according to our frame of reference, in Surah Al-Rahman, وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. There remains only the countenance of your Lord, the face of your Lord, of might and glory. And that's verse 27. So, in our terms, the face is a part of a person. So, in terms of the attributes of Allah, we don't say that about the attributes of Allah, that they're part of Allah. So, talking about that as an example of this category is in itself is a stretch of the use of language. Another example, ذَلِكَ بِمَا قَدَّمَتْ يَدَاكَ. This is for what your two hands have sent ahead of you. Surah Al-Hajj, verse 10. That same phrasing is used a number of times in the Quran. So, because most of the actions that a person does, the hands are used for it, but it's what the person has done as a whole that's intended there. And there's the flip side of that, using the whole to refer to one of its parts, and I neglected to copy an example of that. Now, we shift now to using an attribute or a trait of the whole to describe a part. In Surah Al-Alaq, verse 16, it's talking about Abu Jahl. It said he will be seized by his forelock, and then it describes the forelock. The forelock is that piece of hair right here. نَاصِيَةٍ كَاذِبَةٍ خَاطِئَةٍ. The lying, sinful forelock. So, the forelock itself is not lying and sinful. It's Abu Jahl who's lying and sinful. And then, some people have called to attention that this indirectly refers to, the place of the nasiya, the forelock, is the forehead and the part of the brain that is involved in rational planning and would seem like the will of the person is the frontal cortex. So that part of the brain is, in Abu Jahl, was lying and sinful. Anyway, that's interesting, but the majazi aspect is still applicable. Using an adjective of a part to describe the whole. Ibrahim, he tells the angels when they, in the form of humans, they're visiting him. He says, "Inna minkum wajilun." Indeed, we're afraid of you. Verse 52 of Surah Al-Hijr. And wajila is a verb that's related specifically to the heart. In the verse we mentioned earlier, in Surah Al-Anfal, talking about the believers, verse 2, wajilat, look at Allahu, wajilat qulubuhum. When Allah is mentioned, their hearts tremble or feel fear. Then you have the use of a general term to refer to something more specific. We mentioned this earlier when we were talking about the am. An example of that in Surah Al-Shura, talking about the angels. وَيَسْتَغْفِرُونَ لِمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. They ask forgiveness for those on the earth. That's verse 5. They're not asking forgiveness for everyone on the earth, only for the believers. And the indication of that is in Surah Al-Ghafir, verse 7, where it starts talking about الَّذِينَ يَحْمِلُونَ الْعَرْشَ وَمَنْ حَوْلَهُ, those who bear the throne and all around it, around the arsh. Says they hymn the praises of the Lord. Then it says, وَيَسْتَغْفِرُونَ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. They ask forgiveness for those who believe.